is negotiating a deal to deport people from the US to Rwanda, even if they're not Rwandan. According to officials, the US would pay Rwanda to accept deportees, including Africans and other third country nationals. Talks are expected to continue in the coming weeks. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, "We want to send you some of the most despicable human beings. The further away from America, the better." But Rwanda's government has been accused of human rights violations, including torture, political disappearances, and backing rebel groups. Critics say this deal is less about security and more about reputation laundering. Pro-democracy advocates are calling the plan morally and legally reprehensible. Is this immigration policy or paid exile? What do you think? Let us know in the comments and read.
All right. Welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream where we talk about this week's breaking news. And we're going to start with Trump wanting to pay Rwanda to take deportees from the United States, racist attacks on young Somali children. We're going to talk about the plot to overthrow Ibrahim Traoré and some details that have emerged in terms of potential countries that are involved and some really interesting follow-ups to some of the discussions we've been having over the last week and more from around Africa. I am Joe Hatagwa, but before I get into my introduction, actually, I should turn it over to our co-host for her introduction. So I'll leave it to you before I say who I am.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gloria Ayo. I'm an African storyteller, not just a storyteller, but an African storyteller. This is my fourth week. We should totally have a party. It's a milestone, but I'm very excited to be back. So I delve into African history. I try to make it as entertaining as possible. And now we're doing current affairs, which is different for me, but I love it. I love the opportunity. And there's always a way to tie both current events and things that happened in the past. And I want to take the opportunity before you introduce yourself to wish you a happy birthday. I know it's a week late because you did kind of sneak it up on all of us. So I couldn't even gather my thoughts. But yeah. I want to appreciate you so much for everything you do for the continent of Africa. Long before I met you, I was a fan. I was like, man, this man. And, meeting you has been way more than what I envisioned. So thank you for just being so inspiring, being so consistent and so diligent. This man works hard, y'all. This man works hard.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Properly last week. Happy birthday, Joe. I hope it was great. You deserve the entire month. So yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, we are exactly 1 week removed from the big day. I am 41 years old, for those who are wondering. The grays in the beard are showing. No, but thank you very much, Gloria. I really appreciate that, and I'm glad to have you as a part of this process. It has been a long, arduous process getting this thing off the ground and doing what we do, and it's always good to have people who have context and good content to be able to share with this audience. So I'm glad to have you as a part of the team as well. Yes. So as Gloria mentioned, I am Joe Hatagwa. I am a Taurus. And my birthday is May 1st. So I am the founder and creator of Authentic African. It is a Pan-African platform focused on bridging the gap between Africans living on the continent and living in the diaspora. I also am very focused on making sure I bring products that are handmade and ethically sourced on the continent to people around the world. So that's, instruments, soaps, lotions, all the things that you can find when you go on your trips to all the different countries around the continent of Africa. We have something from, if I'm not mistaken, about 17 or 18 different countries around the continent of Africa on AuthenticAfrican.com, which I quietly relaunched a week ago. So you can always check it out. It's the same name as the platform, so you can check out what's there. Also, my goal is to get people to move, visit, and invest in Africa in any particular order. But that is my goal, to help us as people of color and of African descent diversify our interests and help to develop the continent. So that is what we're about with Authentic African. And this week, we have a ton of news to go over. And so that's what this live stream is about, is talking about this week's news. As you can see, we have a new joint logo in the upper right-hand corner. Gloria has her logo here.
Yay, I made
So
it.
we're up here now. We're ready to go. And so Tim Black says happy birthday. Thank you. Okay, so let's get into it. First things first, right? We've talked about the United States involvement on the continent of Africa in various different countries, and today's headline story is no different. You guys might be familiar with something similar to this because the United States has done this with El Salvador recently. If you guys aren't familiar, but in that case, there were some accidents. Right. First, they sent some women there. The women got sent back. They've also 30% of the people that were sent on those 3 flights did not have any criminal background. And they're now in jail for life in a place that is known for torture. And their only crime was to either not show up for a asylum meeting or actually just did not structure their asylum application properly, and now they are going to be in jail for life and likely to be tortured as part of that process. Now, that's not specifically what we're talking about here, but just to give you an idea of the things that are happening with a program like this. And so now we're going to talk about Rwanda in a second. Sorry, that was off the top of the head. I do want to give you guys some background here. So the Trump administration is negotiating with Rwanda to accept U.S. deportees. So reportedly to include people with criminal records who have served time, which is a little bit different from what they did recently. So, however, in recent news, as an indicator of the future action, we should expect that they're also going to include innocent people and those who not have committed crime. Talks, but there has not been any final agreements as of yet.
Okay. Bear with us. We're having a bit of an internet challenge. And these are some of the challenges we're trying to speak against. We need internet. We need the internet.
We need internet in Africa for sure. Are we hearing me again? Am I back?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so we're back. Sorry, we got to blame Africell. You guys know when I'm on the continent, my internet connection is poor. So my apologies. I am in the outer provinces in Sierra Leone right now. So hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, so what I was saying is the Trump administration is negotiating with Rwanda to accept U.S. deportees, reportedly to include people who have committed crimes. However, if recent news is an indicator of future action, there's likely to be some mistakes made and some innocent folks that will be sent, or folks that do not deserve to be deported to be deported. That's just how this administration operates. Rwanda has confirmed that they're in talks, but there is no final agreement. The catch is the U.S. is likely offering financial incentives, much like the UK's failed 2023 deal. And I will say the U.S. offered financial incentives in another similar offer for El Salvador recently. So it's likely that they're doing the same here. Rwanda would be the first African nation in such agreement with America. While this matters, it's another example of Western nations dumping problems on Africa, similar to UK's abandoned Rwanda deportation scheme that faced global backlash. Obviously, it sets a dangerous precedent for African sovereignty. So we're going to jump into a video here that kind of talks about it a bit more, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
On Sunday that it is holding talks with the Trump administration on a possible deal to receive immigrants deported from the United States. Rwandan Foreign Minister Olivier Nduhungirehe told the state broadcaster that discussions were in the early stages. The announcement came after multiple news reports that the US is looking for international partners to deport people. American President Donald Trump has vowed to carry out the largest deportation operation in US history. His administration is targeting alleged gang members but also student activists journalists and legal immigrants. CNN reported that the US is considering sending migrants with criminal records to Rwanda and Libya. In recent years, Rwanda has tried to position itself as a destination for Western countries to deport unwanted migrants. In 2022, Kigali signed an agreement with the United Kingdom to take in thousands of asylum seekers. The deal fell through after British and European courts stopped scheduled flights on human rights grounds.
All right. So, as mentioned, there have been mistakes made previously, and we can expect no different here. Gloria, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Knowing what we've seen in recent news and what failed previously with Rwanda, what are your thoughts on this potential deal with Rwanda, with the U.S. versus what the U.K. had done previously?
Yeah, this is eerily similar to what happened in the U.K. As you pointed out. And of course, that was a failed deportation deal with Kigali. And that was 2022 or something like that. And a lot of people criticized the deal because, I mean, obviously, for so many reasons, which I'll get into in just a bit. But it took about 2 years and it eventually collapsed after a UK court ruled it as unlawful. Rwanda has also reportedly worked with Israel, Libya, and the EU states on vague migrant transfers. So Rwanda is quite the host when it comes to migrants throughout the world, and of course, the clear reason could be funding, right? Now, the migrants that Trump is trying to send to Rwanda, let me make something very clear, are not Rwandan. They would be citizens of other African countries, some from the Caribbean, maybe even Latin American countries. These are people who were denied asylum or overstayed visas, and now they're facing deportation. So instead of sending them back to their home countries, which may be unstable, may just simply refuse to receive them. I don't know why any country would refuse to receive their citizen. Instead of just sending them back to their home countries, Trump wants to offload them to Rwanda, likely in exchange for some sort of funding, some sort of aid. Rwanda is being paid to accept strangers yet again. So what's going on is these rich countries are externalizing their border enforcement, while African countries are positioned as the place for the world's displaced people. And I don't get why Rwanda, I get why Rwanda would keep getting involved. Here are some possibilities. Money. Hosting these deportees could bring infrastructure development. It could bring job creation programs. It could give them direct funding. And reputation management. The allegations of a clampdown on freedom of expression could actually be softened with deals like this one. Matter of fact, some critics say Rwanda has a history of human rights abuse when it comes to migrants, but Rwanda has denied these allegations. So it's positioning itself as a safe third country. It has done this with Israel in secretive past deals. Of course, the UK, even though that was later scrapped. But the big question is, what happens when things go wrong? What would accountability look like? Either way, this could be dangerous. Rwanda could end up becoming a dumping ground for displaced people who have no connection whatsoever to Rwanda. There's little transparency on what rights these deportees will have or how they will be housed, how they will be protected. Yes, it's a different migration because there are speculations of integration provisions like housing, stipends, work opportunities, which were also proposed during the deal with the UK. But this is all speculative. Also, the citizenship of the deported migrants would remain with their original home countries, not Rwanda. So these migrants are going to need housing again, jobs, safety, but Rwanda is already dealing with its own challenges, economic and social challenges. What will happen when you have displaced migrants from all over the world living in Rwanda, not by their choice? Imagine the mental and emotional toll on these migrants who have already been rejected by America, and now they are forcibly relocated to another foreign country. Shouldn't we be concerned? I think we should.
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. I agree, and I think a big part of this, I think that is interesting is look, you know, you were seeking asylum, so understandably, I guess it makes sense not to send them back to their home country. I guess if they're denied entry, or they're denied asylum in the United States, sending them to another foreign country that they were never planning to go to, they have no plan for and no way to communicate back to who they left. You know, I think it's sloppy, and I think that the term that I've heard recently is when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. Right. So, I think the way that the Trump administration approaches things is almost always with a forcible hand, and always thinks that the way to a solution is a forceful, blunt, without nuance or any thought, like plan, or really thinking it through. And I think it's just really unfortunate to see that Rwanda is willing to take money to in exchange for people who obviously we're looking for a better life somewhere else, and it's likely that they're not going to be able to get that when going to Rwanda. Obviously this is an very unpopular policy, and but the Trump administration doesn't care, right? Their goal is to purport that they're sending criminals. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is, I think many people might agree if it's only criminals, but we know what continues to happen. Well, first of all, anybody who overstays their visa is now considered a criminal, right? So when they're using that terminology, that's what they're saying, right? And the thing is, what keeps happening is they keep doing this with green card holders, right? They're starting to deport green card holders. They've deported American citizens accidentally. A young girl with cancer, I think she was 6 years old, was deported recently, right? These are the things that the Trump administration is doing. And it's, like I said, a heavy-handed approach with not much skill or tactics. And so I don't see that this would be done in any other way but with a heavy-handed approach. So I think we'll watch it closely and see what happens. I hope that this deal does not go through, but we should continue to keep watching it and see what actually happens.
Can I just add?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
My concern again is Africa being used as some sort of geopolitical dumping ground. There's a pattern where Western nations outsource their immigration problems to smaller countries, especially African countries, and then you're offering aid, infrastructure, you're offering cash. But is Africa supposed to clean up the West's migration mess? If Africa has produced refugees due to the mess that they created, or the West was at least complicit in the mess that's going on in Africa now. What happens when the same continent that has produced refugees becomes a host for refugees of other countries? What protections exist for people who have been deported into countries that they've never lived in and again did not choose? What happens to their dignity? And this is all in light of Trump's proposal to pay migrants to self-deport to leave the US. Because they say it's a nicer way to deport people. And of course, things like that have happened in the UK. They've happened in Germany, Switzerland. On one hand, you're spending billions on militarized borders. On the other hand, you're paying migrants to leave. It's looking more like political optics than security. Paying people to leave, sending people to Rwanda looks like it's just a softer anti-immigrant tactic. But how about fixing the problem that brings these people here in the first place? For instance, stop meddling in African affairs. Migration is not a crime. It's a survival strategy, and no border wall, no money you pay, none of it can erase that. So the deportation of migrants to Rwanda, it's still a developing story, but it's part of a very troubling trend, especially as it relates to international migration.
Well put. And from one story to the next, and speaking of the U.S.'s involvement on the continent of Africa, we've covered this extensively over the last week, the foiled Burkina Faso coup and the alleged United States and Ivorian connection. Now, this is alleged. The last time someone made mention of something like this, the United States cracked down on certain platforms. So, wish us luck as we talk about the story.
Yes.
So look, I'll kind of take you guys through a timeline, and then we will go to a video and which will give a little bit more context. But on the 21st of April, as you guys remember, Burkina Faso said that it had thwarted another takeover attempt. Ouagadougou alleged that Ivory Coast was harboring some of the key conspirators. The plot's goal was to sow chaos and to place Burkina Faso under quote unquote external control. So the Pentagon's chief of Africa operations and the Ivorian defense minister met at least twice this year in 2025. So on 14th of February, Valentine's Day, U.S. General Michael Langley, the same guy who pissed off a lot of people in the last couple of weeks, met on the sidelines with members of the Ivorian leadership of the Munich, and they met at the Munich Security Conference to discuss quote unquote bilateral cooperation. The two also met on the 24th of April, 8 days after the planned coup date, to discuss military cooperation and to look again, quote unquote, at the sub-regional security situation. So Burkina Faso has long suspected Ivory Coast of being a rear base for malign actors. In April 2024, Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traoré said that the neighboring country welcomed all of the destabilizers to their homeland. In July that year, he alleged that a major city in Ivory Coast was the center of operations to destabilize Burkina Faso. So on the 3rd of April 2025, U.S. Africa Command or AFRICOM boss Langley tried to tarnish Traoré's reputation by accusing him of using Burkina Faso's gold to pay his own personal security rather than for the good of his people. Previously, in March of 2024, he admitted that AFRICOM's goal was securing access and influence in Africa. So Burkina Faso, with its alliance of Sahelian states, has hurt the goal of pivoting towards China and Russia. So, or by pivoting towards China and Russia. So, obviously Washington has been accused of manufacturing consent in the past, first discrediting leadership it opposes before launching regime change operations. Obviously WMD claims before the Iraq invasion is one example of that. The US, like France, has been driven out of the Sahel after anti-imperialist revolution swept through the region. The Pentagon lost access to the most expensive drone base in the world in Niger, which is Burkina Faso's regional ally. So with its interests challenged and its track record evident, what does the US really seek by courting Ivory Coast? So we're going to jump into this video and we will have some commentary on the other side.
On social media, US Africa Command Michael Langley is seen exchanging pleasantries with Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara. Let's watch the video. Has raised global concerns about the danger it poses, especially to Captain Ibrahim Traoré. This meeting comes few days after the US command, Michael Langley, leveled some allegations against the Burkina Faso president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Michael Langley accused President Captain Ibrahim Traoré of using the gold in Burkina Faso to enrich himself, and how that the US wants the arrest of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. And the president of Ivory Coast, who Captain Ibrahim Traoré said is involved in planning the coup against his life. Now, these two people who planned against him and said wrong things about him met. The people are worried. Yes.
So we'll leave it there. I'd love to hear from you, Gloria, on this particular topic, right? Because you and I have talked about this. We reported on this last Thursday. We talked a bit about the Ivorian angle, and some people had asked about it. So now you've gotten it, right? As those watching, you guys have heard what the Ivorian angle is. So yeah, Gloria, what are your thoughts on the Ivory Coast's alleged involvement, based on what Burkina Faso is saying, and how they're implicating the United States as well?
Yes, and it's all alleged. So please don't come for us. But Côte d'Ivoire's government, let me just emphasize, has firmly denied any involvement in the alleged coup plot. They've rejected the claims as unfounded. But this hasn't stopped any strain in diplomatic relations. Burkina Faso even recalled military trainees from Côte d'Ivoire to show that they have no interest in any sort of relationship with them. Now, historically, their relationship has been on and off, well, mostly off. When Thomas Sankara died, Côte d'Ivoire was actually in the spotlight. In the 1980s, Sankara's policies were a sharp contrast with Côte d'Ivoire's policies. His were less pro-Western. So after he got killed in 1987, and that was what brought his friend who, was behind the killing, Blaise Compaoré, to power. Compaoré aligned more closely with Côte d'Ivoire's interests. Mm-hmm. After Compaoré was ousted in 2014, guess where he ran to? Côte d'Ivoire. He was granted asylum by President Ouattara, who is the current president. Now, the allegations from Côte d'Ivoire, or rather the allegations from Burkina Faso, are coming with receipts, or at least history makes these allegations, people raising their eyebrows like, okay, not that we're saying they're facts, but Traoré's government claimed that there were actors involved that were connected to former regimes, with key players frequently visiting Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. Compaoré has lived in Côte d'Ivoire since fleeing his own people, after ruling them for 27 years after the death of Sankara. So despite being sentenced in absentia by a Burkinabe court for his role in Sankara's murder, Ouattara's government offered him sanctuary. He didn't go there as an exile. He went there as a protected ally. Paul-Henri Damiba, who was ousted by Traoré, has also made secret visits to Abidjan. He's been spotted hanging out there a little bit, or quite a bit. So now we're seeing President Ouattara arm in arm with Emmanuel Macron, which further proves that the West, they don't need a leader to be good. They just need you to cooperate. So hanging out with Macron and hosting Compaoré and even Michael Langley, you can see where Burkina Faso is coming from. And speaking of this infamous Michael Langley, why is the United States, this so-called champion of democracy, why are you comfortably seated in the backyard of a man whose rule has been far from clean? The US, again, is only about its interests. It's trying to get relationships with proxy local forces. But why Côte d'Ivoire? Why is America building military trust with a man who shelters Africa's most infamous political fugitives? But anyway, if indeed the government of Côte d'Ivoire is complicit, it won't be the first time that a neighboring country will undermine a revolutionary neighbor. It happened to Kwame Nkrumah. He was overthrown due to the complicity of West African regimes. And if we look at Ouattara's history when he was in power, let's even say, okay, let's even forget the talk about complicity, the allegations. He became president in May 2011 after the controversial 2010 election, which led to a civil conflict. It led to the ousting of then President Laurent Gbagbo, and his presidency began under heavy international backing, especially from France and the United Nations, who intervened militarily to remove the former president after he refused to concede. That crisis saw thousands killed. Ouattara was re-elected in 2015, then controversially ran again in 2020 for a third term. In spite of the constitutional limits, he rewrote the rules. In 2016, his government introduced a new constitution, which was passed via referendum. That constitution maintained the two-term limit, but Ouattara's legal team argued that because the document was brand new, his previous 2 terms under the old constitution no longer counted. So there was a constitutional reset. He won the 3rd term in 2020 in spite of protests and dozens being killed. He won 94% of the vote. There have been accusations of human rights abuses, electoral manipulation, yet he was one of the people from ECOWAS condemning the overthrow of Mohamed Bazoum in Niger. And only recently, a court ruled that the Tijani Tiam from the opposition, they removed him from the presidential poll, so he cannot even contest or even vote. But the West sees Côte d'Ivoire as stable, and people like Ibrahim Traoré, people like Thomas Sankara, they are framed as threats. So when you look at all these factors, you would understand why Burkina Faso is suspicious, and they very likely have even more intel than we will ever know.
Yeah, well put. And I think that historical context is really important, right? Because, you know, when people wonder why, you know, Ivory Coast has been implicated or alleged to have been a part of this, right? All of that history leads you to understand at least why they've been alleged to have been a part of this attempted coup. Yes. And then with Michael Langley having just met with them, you know, and as you mentioned, right? You know, look, if we're going to have a policy, you know, we expect it to be a blanket policy across the board. So if you do not believe in regime change, if you don't believe in coups, then you can't selectively decide which coups are okay and which ones aren't. Or if you believe in democracy, you can't selectively decide who's okay to work with and who isn't. If it's all bad, then it's all bad, right? And so, you know, obviously every country operates in its own best interest, which is understandable to a degree. But if you're going to do that, then don't pretend to be, you know, the leaders and or the people who have all of the their noses clean and who only operate with impunity, or who only operate with you know, above board, and only work with countries that follow you know, our standard, or the American standard of democracy. So yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, and we'll continue to follow the story. I mean, as more comes out, I'm interested to see, you know, what ends up happening here. As mentioned, you know, 2 former you know, traitors of the country of Burkina Faso are currently and or full-time, you know, visiting the Ivory Coast. And so obviously this is a problem, right? There's a comment here from one of our viewers saying that, hello, everyone, they consider Benin Republic and Nigeria acting as actors to destabilize the AES as well. There are folks, yeah, alleging that. Yes, there are folks alleging that as well, for sure. You know, we are not. Yeah.
Why is that making you laugh? Sorry.
We will leave that alone. On to the next story. So, you know, on to the topic of Nigeria, as a matter of fact. Actually, before we get to the topic of Nigeria, I do want to get to a story in the United States, because it does have to do with a young Somali child. And so, you know, it speaks to migrants in the United States and how they're treated, especially over the last 10 years. There's been a shift in how communication with migrants and people of color has been. So, you know, there's recently some people are calling her a Karen, a racist mother at the very least, has raised, if I'm not mistaken, the last number I read in a news story was over 600,000. I'm hearing it's approaching $1 million for hate. And she's raised this money because she's lost her job after having a moment of wild hate speech. So so her name is Shiloh Hendricks, who unleashed.
I'm sorry.
Sorry?
Her name needs to be said.
Yes. So her name is Shiloh Hendricks. She unleashed a racist tirade calling a 5-year-old Somali child and a Somali man the N-word on the 28th of April in Rochester, Minnesota. And by the way, Minnesota has a ton of Somali people there. Ilhan Omar is a representative in one of the districts there. But instead of the consequences, Hendricks is cashing in. Since starting a fundraiser on Give, Send, Go, which of course you cannot do. She would not have been able to do this on GoFundMe. She did it on Give, Send, Go, which by the way is a Christian crowdfunding platform, but has been used a ton by white nationalists and far white extremists. She has rapidly raised more than $600,000 and it's well on its way to the $1 million target. Now she claims her life and her family have been threatened since the video went viral, sparking outrage from social media users. So Omar, the man speaking in the video, is unrelated to the child in question. So he actually was a witness and just recorded what he saw. So donors have also expressed solidarity with Hendricks, with one identifying himself as an quote unquote average white man, praising her for quote unquote bravery and hoping she will now afford to live in a quote unquote nicer neighborhood, one free of these savages. So let that sink in. Racism against a black child has become a profitable enterprise. Another example of someone using the Give, Send, Go service to raise funds in the same way that Kyle Rittenhouse did. You know, when he shot two people and injured another person in 2020 in Wisconsin. Obviously, the N-word is an offensive term used to describe a black person, derived from the Latin word, you know, meaning black. Though its usage started during U.S. slavery, commercial rap music obviously popularized it and, you know, took off the hard ER and made it an A. But the fact is that Hendricks' actions would affect obviously the child and or you know, and who knows how this is going to continue to reverberate around the country. I mean, it's incredible that she's going to actually, or I don't want to use the word incredible, but it's shocking to me that she's been able to raise so much money. You know, it's one thing for people to sign a petition. It's one thing to people to comment on something, but to actually give their money to someone who said such racist comments, and so much so that she is generating close to $1 million is nuts. But let's go to the video and we'll have some more commentary on the other side.
Child? Did you call the child? You call him? Okay, why don't you have the balls to say it right now again? Okay. All right, that's what you say. Nobody digging shit. That little kid, you call him a nigger?
Man, that gives me flashbacks. I'd love to hear from you first, and then I will give some additional thoughts on my end as well.
Okay. I got so triggered watching that video, and just hearing that again is, I literally brought this, and I'm not gonna do it. But this triggered me, Joe. It triggered me so hard. You know, this is a 5-year-old child who is autistic, visibly confused by the confrontation. You call him the N-word multiple times. And what was that sound she was making? The little funny sound, like, what was that? You know? And then to double down on the racism in spite of being called out for it, because there's privilege. And how is she the victim? She's now the one who needs protection. These sorts of acts need to be criminalized. Somewhere in the UK, a Nigerian lady, I saw a video recently where she was breastfeeding her child. And there was a Caucasian man on the bus recording her. And do you know what the audacity of what he had? Do you know this man was so bold? He said, they asked him, why would you do that? He said, I'm English. What does that even mean? But that's what the world has become. And with this video, it's a lot going on at once. There's racism, there's ableism, there's white victimhood. It's become a pattern. You weaponize public sympathy, and somehow the person who abused somebody walks away enriched, while that young, innocent boy and his family are left to process this trauma. And what is particularly painful is that this happened to a Somali boy, one of many children from East African migrant communities who live in Minnesota, like you pointed out. They're already struggling with systemic neglect. Somali American families have fought for years to get proper diagnosis, educational support and inclusion for their children. Now imagine a child, imagine a child with autism still trying to make sense of the world. I'm so sorry, I didn't want to do this, but you're targeting him for the color of his skin. That's terrorizing. And imagine the Christian crowdfunding site that's hosting her fundraiser. They didn't take it down. There's no policy against profiting off of racism, because in the eyes of those systems, what she did was not violent enough. It wasn't criminal enough. It wasn't offensive enough to break the rules. But if the boy's father had spoken out with anger, if he had screamed, he would have been flagged. And this tells every child of color, every parent of a child with autism, every immigrant family that you're not safe. And if you speak up, the person who abused you might get rich. The victim becomes the villain. It's just so heartbreaking. There was a video of a white autistic boy being mistreated on a school bus. The caregiver was a Black woman. She was condemned by every race. She was not protected. She was not funded. She was dragged. Everybody, Black communities, everybody dragged her. There was a near universal outrage because she abused her power. She hurt an innocent child, and she should be held accountable. That's what humanity looks like. You defend the defenseless without making excuses. Look at what happened in Minnesota. A white woman verbally assaulting and mocking a 5-year-old boy with autism, doubling down. The video goes viral, and what happens? She becomes the victim. On a Christian platform, you treat her discomfort as more urgent than the pain of that child. That's white fragility. And the boy's family, a Black immigrant Muslim family, they actually also had a fundraiser. But I think they got to like 360,000 or something, and they shut it down because for them, their dignity was more important than some money. I need to take a break. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. Absolutely. And as a parent yourself, I can understand how it feels. And look, I've had this exact situation happen, when I was in high school, playing sports. We had a school that would use these terms to describe us. Being from an African family, my name was made fun of. We were all the things. And that's something that, we thought was in the past, right? Because even at that time, you were afraid to say you were African. In the early 90s, when I was, just coming up and not really understanding who I was and where I come from, there was always a need to try to assimilate and try to fit in with these people like her. And you felt like there was something wrong with you because of the way they made you feel.
Yeah.
And to see a video like this in 2025, you know, it's enlightening because it shows that there's still so many people who feel the way she feels because of how much she's been able to raise. You know, raising $600,000 it's no small feat for anybody trying to do anything noble, let alone for someone who has that kind of vitriol for a child.
Yeah.
You know, a 5-year-old child, again, who is on the spectrum, who has autism. So, you know, may have had challenges understanding what was going on and going into a bag. I mean, there's a way to handle that.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways to handle a situation like that. And the way that she went about it, it's clear how much she hates people who are not like her.
Yeah.
And the fact that there were so many people willing to fund, to give her money is atrocious. So yeah, I mean, there's so many other things that I can say. I will just leave it at that because in the interest of time, but you know, we wanted to share this story because this was a Somali child, and you know, as a child of immigrants myself, and I don't know, you know, as a co-host who actually has migrated to the United States, you know, I thought this story was important because, you know, I felt when I heard what she was saying, it reminded me of a very specific football game at a specific school where that specific word was used by people chanting from the crowd. And so, you know, it reminds me of that. And you would think that at this point in time, we're beyond that, but we're not. Obviously we're not.
So the indoor playground that I take my child to, there was a day I went with him, and a boy who couldn't have been older than maybe 10 drank my son's juice because I looked away and I asked the parent near me, who took my juice? Oh my gosh. She said a child. I said, which child? You know, I was just asking. And then she told me that she thought he may have had a, you know, disability. And when I saw the child, I knew, I mean, immediately, I wasn't going to fight him anyway, but I was just like, why would you just take, you know, but it wasn't even a question of, you know, it's not a thing. You let it go. And what this video, you know, has made me, it's really made me reflect as far as the soul of what's happening, not just in America, but in the global psyche. We're standing at the edge of a moral collapse. Trauma is being politicized, innocence is being racialized. And in all this, the most vulnerable people, you know, children, Africans, immigrant children, they have to pay the price. And we're so afraid of being on the wrong side politically that we stopped seeing people. Anti-immigrant sentiment is fueling a lot of fire. People are becoming brazen because they've been given permission from it's really bad now. I'm sorry, all the way to 1955 when that 14-year-old boy Emmett Till was lynched in Mississippi, and how a white woman accusing him falsely of making advances. She was never held accountable. But anyway, thank you for allowing us share this, by the way, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important. It's an important story, and I think that you know, we should be covering things like that. You know, even though most of what we cover is on the continent of Africa, this is an African child in the United States, and it's important as two people who live in the U.S. most of our time. I think it's just important to have these kinds of conversations because these are things that we can encounter, and people should just be aware. So with that, we will shift gears a bit and move on to a story in Nigeria, specifically to a tech shift, and two stories really specifically to Nigeria. But the first one is a tech shift. A Meta, specifically Facebook, may be leaving Nigeria. Meta is in a heated clash with Nigeria's Consumer Protection Agency over a $220 million fine for data privacy violations. The fine was imposed after Meta was accused of mishandling consumer data, joining a list of countries like India, France, and Australia that have raised similar concerns. So in retaliation, Meta has threatened to shut down Facebook and Instagram in Nigeria, arguing that the fine is unfair and damaging to its business. Nigeria's Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, the FCCPC, has rejected Meta's appeal to overturn the decision, accusing the tech giant of using calculated tactics to create negative public pressure with over 160 million internet users in Nigeria. Both platforms are widely popular, especially Facebook. Meta now faces a June deadline to either pay the fine or follow through on this threat. So we're going to jump into a video and give some commentary on the other side.
And tech giant Meta are locked in a heated face-off. The row stems from massive data fines, which Meta has been ordered to pay over consumer data breaches. In response, Mark Zuckerberg's company has threatened to shut down Facebook and Instagram in Nigeria. The fine, amounting to $220 million, was issued by Nigeria's Consumer Protection Agency, the FCCPC. The regulator cites similar accusations that Meta faces in countries like India, France, and Australia. It argues the company complied with their data protection laws without threatening to pull the plug. Now, recently, Meta approached a Nigerian tribunal, but its effort to overturn the decision was rejected.
So, sorry about that. So, Gloria, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You know, obviously 164 million users in Nigeria. It's a widely used, platform, both Instagram and Facebook. What are your thoughts on Facebook saying a fine, which, by the way, is like a rounding error for them? It's like a parking ticket. It's not detrimental to their business at all. But anyway, saying that this fine is detrimental to their business, and they're threatening to leave the country if they're forced to pay the fine.
He says a parking ticket. But the big question, the question is this really about regulation, or is it about control and money? Nigeria is a huge market for Meta. Like with Facebook alone, it's over 51 million users. And there's a whole lot of engagement on Instagram. A whole lot of people use WhatsApp. So withdrawing Meta services could have far-reaching implications for Nigeria's digital ecosystem. And they're saying it's about protecting Nigerian users, but it looks like a desperate state looking to squeeze money from whoever they can. Looks like. Nigeria has far more urgent problems. The economy is in free fall. Inflation is hurting the masses. The naira has collapsed. There's insecurity. We have kidnappings. We have insurgencies. We talked about the plateau, killings that happened recently. Hospitals are collapsing. Electricity is unreliable. Food prices are rising faster than salaries. So when the government prioritizes a massive $290 million fine against Meta, is it fair? I mean, we have to ask the question, considering everything going on with Nigeria right now, is this the time to fight about data protection regulations? And don't get me wrong, this is important. Yes, technological advancement needs to align with legal compliance. Users' rights have to be protected. But what happens to the consumers? If Meta leaves Nigeria, I'll tell you now, people will suffer. It's not just a tech company. People use it for communication, for millions who cannot afford SMS or calls. It's a marketplace for small businesses, from hairdressers to the food vendors. It's a news pipeline for political awareness and mobilization. Many people rely on WhatsApp. It's how I communicate with my people in Nigeria, and I'm sure you do too. Absolutely. Content creators rely heavily on these platforms. So WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, these are not luxuries in Nigeria. These are infrastructure. Because the telecommunications companies are charging premium rates, yet their coverage is spotty. So if Meta subsidized data tools like Facebook Lite, WhatsApp bundles, if they go offline, millions of low-income Nigerians could lose access overnight, all because a giant of Africa and a giant of the internet could not agree. I also wonder if this is yet another clampdown on free speech, because this is the same government that banned Twitter in 2021 for allowing Nigerians to criticize President Buhari. It's the same government that has proposed social media bills designed to criminalize dissent under vague terms like false information. It's a system that often sees online expression as a threat. It doesn't see it as a right. So when you fix a massive fine I mean, we think of the history of digital censorship and a possible pullout of Meta. So it becomes very real. Is this Nigeria trying to enforce data laws, or is it just trying to suppress free speech and expression under the guise of regulation? I mean, two things can be true. Maybe they do want better privacy enforcement, but the way they're going about it, because the content creators, the influencers, the designers, the skit makers, they're gonna suffer. Nigeria does not need. People don't need any one more thing that would make their lives harder. Yep. Nigeria does have a very vibrant digital creator economy. So if you come for them, it's like yet another thing. Like, can the people catch a break, Joe?
I agree 100%. And as you mentioned, yes, I mean, I communicate with 4 Nigerian staff members currently through WhatsApp, right? And so without WhatsApp, and also they also are the ones who manage the Authentic African Instagram page.
Oh Lord, we're not
right? So that is an immediate hit to me if this does actually happen. And as you mentioned, I also have friends in Nigeria who sell wigs, who sell clothes, who sell fragrances, and they all do it on their WhatsApp statuses, on Instagram stories, right? These platforms have been used for them. Now, I will say that, in the interest of time, I know we don't have a ton of time, but just real quickly, Real Source says something here, and I think this is an interesting viewpoint, but I think it's important to understand how immediately devastating this would be. So what the Real Source says is if Meta leaves, it will be a great opportunity for Africa's techies to develop something independent of the West. China has their own social media platforms. Africa can do the same. I agree, but China wasn't forced to do it after having already been so dependent on it, right? China decided we're not going to allow you in our country and then had people build it.
Yes.
And
created the environment for it.
Right. And they had the environment for it, right? I mean, they already had systems in place to ensure funding for these programs, right? Because you're going to get government funding to be able to create replicas and copycats of the platforms. And you also have a homogenous society of over 1 billion people who can all use a social media platform, where we're talking about one country on a continent of 52 countries, which is a very different thing, right? So I think it's important to understand that there are people who've already built lives around these platforms. And so you immediately strip it away. It changes everything. In fact, the platforms that we're talking on today, much of where I'm live today, we're live on Instagram, when I keep looking over here, I'm looking at Instagram. We're live on Facebook as well. That goes away because the people who run all of that are in Nigeria, right? So I just want to be very clear. Yes, we'd love to see Nigeria develop its own digital platforms. But again, you have to keep in mind, when you want to target a large group of people, you need to be where those people are. Facebook has over 2 billion people on that platform around the world. Out of the 9 billion people in the world, more than 2 billion of them are on Facebook. That allows a Nigerian to be able to reach those people. If Nigerians build their own platform, it would be for Nigeria. It's going to be difficult to strip people away from a platform as big as Facebook, which is used globally. And as you mentioned, with Zuckerberg, he subsidized internet usage for the use of Facebook with Facebook Lite. And then also communications platforms like WhatsApp are really important for communicating around the world. Long before Facebook acquired or Meta acquired WhatsApp, it was something that was used to communicate everywhere. Before that, there were these things called calling cards. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but so you were using calling cards back then. So I get the idea of Africans building their own, and we should be concurrently, but not immediately in the absence of something that is so important to people's everyday lives. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, or if we can move on to the next.
You said it all, Joe. You said it all.
Okay. So with that, I do want to move on to the next story, with Nigeria banning Pan-Africanism, basically, with arrest of Burkina Faso supporters. So I'm gonna read a little bit, and then we will give some commentary on the other side. So it appears that the 2 years Burkina Faso has spent under revolutionary leadership has scared Nigerian leadership. Pan-Africanism is apparently now banned in Nigeria. And now this is, specifically speaking to this. So at least that's what it feels like in Nigeria. Many Nigerian activists have discovered this when they organized Pan-African solidarity rallies, specifically one solidarity rally in support of Burkina Faso. So the rally was to be held in the spirit of countless other rallies around the world that took place on the same day in defense of Burkina Faso and its leader, Ibrahim Traoré, against attacks from the outside world, specifically Michael Langley. Now, he immediately received a cease and desist order from the Edo State Commissioner of Police, and he did. He did stop the protests. And now you guys remember last Thursday we showed you videos of all those protests around the world. Nigeria was meant to have one, at least in Edo State, and it was shut down. So the Department of State Services and the police stormed his office, detained about 6 individuals, later released 4, keeping the leader, and I can pronounce his name. I'm working on it. Edu, what is it? Is it Edu Kapaye?
There you go.
Yeah, and another associate in custody. The act has been condemned in Edo State chapter of the Take It Back movement, calling it a violation of the constitutional rights. President Bola Tinubu's government has maintained a position of hostility against Alliance of Sahelian States, which Burkina Faso is a member of. Following a popular revolutionary coup against Western favorite Mohamed Bazoum in Niger, Tinubu, who then chaired ECOWAS, and who also chairs ECOWAS now, pushed firmly for ECOWAS invasion to reinstate Bazoum. Solidarity from Mali and Burkina Faso with Niger is credited for eventually giving ECOWAS a reason to stop the invasion. Since then, there have been no conciliatory moves from Abuja. So let us know what you think. Why did Nigeria ban rallies in support of Burkina Faso? I'd love to hear from you, Gloria.
And I will say I'm quite disappointed in how President Tinubu has led Nigeria. President Tinubu was at the forefront back in the day fighting the military. He was targeted at some point, and come into power and suppress free speech, the right to protest, and bad governance protest. NSARS 2020. There are still a lot of questions around that, right? I'm not accusing him of anything, but there's still a lot of questions around NSARS, the people who got killed reportedly, and what the government did to seemingly cover up. And then we had the End Bad Governance protests last year. People are desperate to survive. You clamp down on these protesters. Children were shot at. People died in the north. People were killed. Their right to protest was suppressed. You were sending a message. You're tear gassing people. You're locking up children. You're sending a message. You're warning people. You do this, this is what's going to happen. You do this, your children will face these consequences. That's what's going on. You're arresting people for speaking. Very Dark Man was picked up recently. You may not be a fan of Very Dark Man, but that was very illegal, what they did to him. They've since released him. So I'm disappointed. Okay, it's bad enough that Nigeria is where it is. But you see, to take away people's rights in a democracy, and you're always quiet. And then they'll say, he's not the one doing it directly. Well, he's the president. How are those things happening? How are people not allowed to express themselves? How are people being called in for questioning? In a democracy, I remember Abacha's time. What is the difference? At least then we knew we're under a military man. Some people will tell you this is worse. So of course we don't have the videos because news outlets don't everybody stays away from these stories that have to do with Burkina Faso. Tinubu has a trend of, obviously he's always in France. He's friends with Macron. Is friends with people in the West. Yay for him. But what does that, how about Africa? That's why Niger banned you, because you're sanctioning and suspending the AES. But again, like I said before, how did you come into power? Was it clean? Wasn't it through a political coup? And I know this is, some people would, hey, I'm going to say what I want to say. It was through a political coup. It was not a clean election. It wasn't clean. It was very dirty. So to keep doing this, to suppress, and for Nigeria, see, and I get people when they say Nigerians are not speaking. Let me tell you. I mean, at the end of the day, who wants to die? The people who died during NSARS, can you mention one name? Do you know a face? What happened to them? So if you're scaring people, they're scare tactics. It's natural. I mean, and it's going to get to a point where people will be so bold they won't care anymore about their lives. It's just disappointing. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, and I agree. You know, look, one of the things living in the United States most of my life, the First Amendment to the American Constitution is the freedom of speech. And, you know, I'm forgetting the second part of it because it's been a long day. And the right to assembly. Sorry. Yes. Right. So the idea that you can get together and congregate and to speak out. And, you know, sometimes we forget that that privilege is not afforded to everyone everywhere. And you see here, but the interesting thing is these people were not even protesting the Nigerian government in this instance, right? The plan was to protest in support of someone in a foreign country. But again, you mentioned the NSARS protest. And just for those who aren't as familiar with that, that was at the end of 2020. There was a protest against a special police unit that was meant to be cracking down on Yahoo boys and drug dealers, etc. And they basically ended up becoming
bloody,
like their own, like a gang unit, basically they became like a gang and they were extorting people and doing all kinds of different things. You can look it up if you guys want the history on that. And so people were protesting this group, and they were live gunshots fired into a crowd of protesters, killing, I don't even remember the number of people who were protesting. So that was what Gloria was referencing there, if you guys aren't familiar. And so, you know, that this kind of, you know, shutting this down just kind of reminds you of how Nigeria has been responding to people who want to get together and protest and or in support of someone who may be not aligned or misaligned with the current leadership in Nigeria. It's really unfortunate.
This protest that I referenced were peaceful. They will say, oh, we're trying to protect the security. No, they were peaceful protests. You made it violent. They weren't violent. Yeah, that's true.
That is absolutely true. Okay, so you know, moving on from Nigeria, because this is an upsetting story, but we'll keep you guys posted as things go on. I mean, obviously the Burkina Faso rally that didn't happen. We just wanted to make sure you guys were aware that there would have been another video we would have displayed last Thursday in Nigeria, but it did not go through. And then we'll keep you posted on the Meta story as it continues to unfold. So now shifting gears to the UAE and their involvement in Sudan's and arming Sudan's RSF. So demonstrators angry at the ICJ, and this is the International Court of Justice, found that it doesn't have jurisdiction in Sudan's genocide case against the United Arab Emirates. So the ICJ isn't disputing the claims. They're just saying they don't have jurisdiction. So to be clear, so a handful of pro-Sudan demonstrators protested outside the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, in The Hague on Monday. So they were angry about the decision made by the top United Nations court to throw out Sudan's genocide case against the United Arab Emirates. The ICJ found that it doesn't have jurisdiction in the case, although it noted deep concern about the spiraling violence in Sudan. While both countries are signatories to the 1948 Genocide Convention, the UAE has a quote-unquote reservation to be part of the treaty that allow countries to sue others at the ICJ over disputes. So Sudanese protesters expressed their disappointment and said that they're asking for justice. One was quoted saying, "Justice will never stop in one place. We go further and we will always be looking for our justice." So what is happening today, this is not the end of the game, he said. So it is said that the Emiratis were arming and funding the rebel paramilitary in its deadly war against the Sudanese army. As many as 150,000 people are believed to have experienced loss of life over 2 years in a conflict between the two sides. And more than 14 million others have been displaced. The UAE, which has denied the accusations, applauded the court's decision. Following the hearing, a senior UAE foreign affairs official, Reem Katate, told reporters that her country, quote unquote, bears no responsibility for the conflict in Sudan. And she also goes on to say, on the contrary, the atrocities committed by the warring parties are well documented. That's what she said. Both the RSF and Sudan's military have been accused of human rights abuses. Meanwhile, the civil war shows no sign of easing. So let's get into a video and have some commentary on the other side.
Full of pro-Sudan demonstrators outside the International Court of Justice in The Hague on Monday. They were protesting against a decision by the top United Nations Court to throw out Sudan's genocide case against the United Arab Emirates. The ICJ found it doesn't have jurisdiction in the case, although it noted deep concern about the spiraling violence in Sudan.
We are looking for justice. So justice will never stop in one place. We go further and we will always be looking for our justice. So what's happening today, this is not the end of the game. We're going further.
Khartoum had accused the UAE of complicity in genocide in the ongoing civil war in Sudan through its alleged support for the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The UAE, which has denied the accusations, applauded the court's decision.
That was reported by Africa News. So, you know, interestingly, the ICJ did, as I mentioned earlier, did not deny the claim. They just denied jurisdiction. Love to hear your thoughts on this, Gloria.
Yeah, so the RSF has been accused of ethnic cleansing and atrocities in West Darfur, particularly targeting the Masalit people. But instead of assessing the substance of these claims, the ICJ dismisses the case entirely on jurisdictional grounds. And again, you referenced the Genocide Convention in 2005 that was signed, with which adds a reservation clause saying it does not consent to ICJ jurisdiction in disputes arising under the convention. So Sudan, despite presenting grave allegations of genocide, found itself locked out, not because the court disagreed with the claims, but because the accused chose to opt out of being held accountable through that legal mechanism. Now, this decision by the ICJ is not, I want to make it very clear, it's not absolving the UAE of being complicit.
Right.
It does not rule out on the facts. It's simply saying we just don't have the permission to judge this. So while UAE officials are celebrating this as vindication, activists, the Sudanese people know better. Okay, this does not mean you're innocent. And there's like a global pattern around this. Israel, the US, Russia, they've all at times refused ICJ or ICC jurisdiction. The Saudi-led war in Yemen allegedly involved UAE abuses. It's also faced similar barriers. So the question now is, what good is a genocide convention if a nation can just reserve the right not to be judged by it? The Sudanese people, particularly in Darfur, are once again left without closure. There's no justice. They have no voice. The death toll keeps rising. The displacement continues. The people fueling the fire directly through proxy, they walk away untouched. Sudan is a lesson in what happens when international courts lose moral force. The victims, they end up losing faith in legal systems, and the perpetrators just get bolder.
Yeah, well put. Well put. I think, you know, legal loopholes. I mean, this is, you know, the fact that the UAE said we we basically do not want to be held responsible if we violate the this particular genocide convention. And so, yeah, I mean, look, I on one hand, I look at this and say, you know, the ICJ not having jurisdiction here is disappointing. But I also wonder if they had jurisdiction and they would have followed through and condemned them for genocide, which I know takes years, because they're also under the process of looking at Israel for the same thing. What would they do anyway? Are they actually going to do anything anyway? Like, what are they doing to actually follow through with sanctions and or some kind of penalties for finding someone guilty of this crime? And so, you know, obviously that system's not working. We need another one. I don't know what the answer is to that, but obviously, you know, I hope to see some shifts and some changes here. And unfortunately, if you follow the money, you'll find out why and who is involved in all of these kinds of wars and proxy wars on the continent of Africa. And so this is just one of those that there's no easy answer to. And, you know, and unless other people decide to go through with their own sanctions, like other countries who trade with the UAE decide to sanction them for something like this, they will continue to arm those rebel forces. Okay, so moving from Sudan to South Sudan, another tragic story. There's a potentially a new civil war brewing after a deadly bombing in South Sudan. At least 7 people have experienced loss of life after a hospital and market were bombed in South Sudan, a medical charity has said, as fears grows of certain or return to civil war. So Doctors Without Borders said helicopter gunships dropped a bomb on a pharmacy of the hospital it runs in one of the states and burning it down, therefore firing on the town for 30 minutes. Before firing on the town for 30 minutes. A drone then bombed the local market. So the hospital is the only one in this particular county which has a population of more than 110,000 people. And its medical supplies were all destroyed. So the charity called the attack, which left 20 people injured, at least 7 people with the loss of life. They called it a clear violation of international humanitarian law. Doctors Without Borders spokesperson told BBC's NewsHour program the charity was still trying to establish the facts, but local witnesses had said the aircraft were quote unquote government forces helicopters. They also said that the hospital is clearly marked as hospital with their logo, the Doctors Without Borders logo, he said. The Doctors Without Borders spokesperson says, we have shared also our coordinates for all the warring parties in the area so that the hospital should be known to both parties as a hospital and should not be a part of the war efforts. There was no immediate comment from South Sudan's government. The BBC has contacted the Foreign Affairs Ministry to find out more. In recent weeks, those who've led UN missions in South Sudan have warned that the country is teetering on the brink of return to a full-scale civil war. There's a lot more here to read, but I think that speaks to it enough. I'm going to jump to a video and we will give some commentary on the other side.
West Africa to East Africa, where at least 7 people have been killed after a hospital and market were bombed in South Sudan, a medical charity has said, as fears grow of a return to civil war. Doctors Without Borders MSF said helicopter gunships dropped a bomb on the pharmacy of the hospital it runs in Old Fangak, Jonglei State, burning it down before firing on the town for 30 minutes. MSF say the hospital is the only one in Fangak County, which has a population of more than 110,000 people, and that all its medical supplies were destroyed. The charity called the attack, which left 20 people injured, a clear violation of international humanitarian law.
It's so sad. A hospital, pharmacy, all those medical supplies in a town of 110,000 people. You know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, the world's youngest nation is again, you know, on the edge of an all-out civil war. And I mean, we must go back to 2011 when South Sudan gained independence from Sudan after decades of brutal war. we all celebrated, the world celebrated. It was like liberation. It was liberation, but within 2 years, a civil war broke out, and all because of deep political mistrust, distrust. There's clear ethnic rivalry, and the people of South Sudan are caught in the middle. They're just caught in the middle. This isn't just a South Sudanese crisis. It's a regional threat. You have Uganda, you have Ethiopia, you have Sudan, which is already dealing with its own problems. You have the Central African Republic, all vulnerable to the spillover violence. Refugee flows could increase. Arms could move across borders. Ethnic militias from different nations could align. Humanitarian agencies, which are already overstretched, with South Sudan, by the way, ranking as one of the worst hunger and one of the worst child malnutrition crises in the world. So it's not about who's to blame. It's about whether or not a government that arrests its vice president without due process amid rising ethnic tension, it's about whether or not they can gain legitimacy. And this is why South Sudan returning to war, it's dangerously close. I hope it doesn't happen. And if it does happen, I mean, what's going to be the next step? South Sudan does not need another ceasefire. It needs real justice. It needs leaders who are willing to lose power if it means that people can just live in peace.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even have much more to add there. I mean, I think the story said it all, and your response says it all. I would just say, obviously, as you mentioned, the South Sudanese folks have already been through something similar with their independence, gaining their independence from Sudan, and now there's another civil war within South Sudan. And you're always left to wonder who's behind these warring factions in these different groups. Yeah. I know it's always blamed on tribal war, but almost always, if you follow the money, there's some outside force that is using them as proxies to fight each other, right? And it's sad to see that this is the thing that's happening at this very day, this day and time. And so we'll continue to keep our eye on this and keep you guys posted on these stories, particularly in Sudan and South Sudan, because they're not talked about enough. And so we want to make sure that we do cover them.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. And so, and to elsewhere around Africa, I mean, there are some stories to pay attention to. There's a ton. I think in the interest of time, we'll probably cover maybe one or two. But specifically, I thought this one was interesting. I think a while back, I don't know if it was us or there was a separate discussion where we talked about the United States offering asylum to South Africans.
Yes.
And they initially said no, but it seems as if now there's a white flight happening in South Africa where 67,000 white South Africans have agreed to take the U.S. asylum offer. Now, what's interesting about this is we just talked about other asylum seekers being shipped to other countries, people of color who are asylum seekers, yet the United States then decided to offer asylum to people who aren't of color to the United States. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this particular story, because you're the one who brought it to my attention. I wasn't even aware.
Yeah, because it's a quiet story. Like, it's just quietly not being talked about, right. And it's just so ironic. Trump is offering refuge to white asylum seekers and he's deporting Black and brown migrants. It shows the hypocrisy in refugee politics. So who is worthy of safety? Who is a threat? The fact that this story gained almost no attention compared to support for African migrants speaks volumes. That's all I got, Joe.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And you said it, right? Because the program that these folks are seeking is asylum, right? The folks that we're talking about in terms of who was sent to El Salvador, who we're potentially talking about who would be sent to Rwanda, right? And in these instances, we're talking about asylum seekers, people who have made claims that their country of origin is not safe for them to live. The United States has determined that we do not want your asylum seekers. However, they then turned around and offered asylum to people who look like them.
Yes.
That is the American story.
Yes.
That is the American story right there.
Those
and
are the worthy Africans.
Right. Those are the worthy Africans to them, right? Of Dutch, and the worthy Africans are the ones of Dutch descent. So with that, I want to mention maybe one more story. Okay, let's look at this one. So Togo, power grab. President eliminates term limits in Togo. Do we want to talk about that a little bit? I was not aware of this story either. This was one that you brought to my attention. So
Yes.
let's talk about that briefly.
Yes, Togo. So Faure Gnassingbé has installed himself as president of the Council of Ministers. This is actually a newly created executive post. It has no term limits, and this is following a controversial constitutional reform. It's not funny. Well, it's just laughable how these people keep trying to play in our faces. This man's family has ruled Togo for 58 years. His father, then him, because according to, in their minds, it's a monarchy, an absolute monarchy at that. And when I'm talking about political coups and all these people are worried about the AES, this is an institutional coup, and rightly so. It's an autocracy, and you're calling it reforms. I don't understand it, but it's basically a case where people are rewriting democracy. So there's absolutely no democracy yet. Not in Togo. Justice for the people of Togo.
Justice for the people of Togo. Yes, absolutely. I know that there were some other stories that we wanted to go over, but in the interest of time, it is 10:26 p.m. around these parts where I am, and I haven't eaten dinner yet. So I'd love to keep going and keep you guys updated with some more of the stories, but we wanted to cover at least the headline stories, and maybe we'll save some of these other stories that we were planning to review for next week, just to give you kind of a quick roundup. But with that, do you have any final thoughts for today?
Can we just tease the headlines? We don't have to go into detail.
Okay, yeah, we can tease the headlines. That's a good point. Yes.
Bodyguard got kidnapped.
Yes.
President Museveni's son is taking credit for it.
Yeah, and if you guys don't know who Bobby Wine is, for those who follow Nigerian politics, he can be akin to like a Peter Obi, maybe in the United States. He could probably be akin to maybe an AOC, maybe depending on who you are. I don't know how you think about that. But it's
Ousmane Sonko of Senegal.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So someone, or maybe more like a Bernie Sanders, I would say. Probably more like a Bernie Sanders, where it's someone who has a groundswell of support, but the establishment did not allow him to win any particular campaign or political campaign. So I think maybe more like a Bernie Sanders in America. For those who support Bernie Sanders, I don't know who the equivalent is on the right, but yeah, that's who I would say he is. And as you mentioned, the current president's son has admitted to kidnapping his bodyguard. So that's the story there. I know that we were supposed to tease it, but I just wanted to give context to who we're talking about. And then there was one more. Ruto dodged a shoe thrown at him, much like George Bush, and we'll talk about that next week as well. Yeah. So I think that is it for now. Any other final words before we call this live stream and bring it to an end?
Every life matters.
Black
lives matter. African lives matter. Please, let's be respectful. Thank you.
Well put. And I will just say, if you haven't already, make sure you like, comment, subscribe to all of the platforms. They're going to be in the comments below. So if you're watching on Authentic Africans platforms, head over to the Gloria Ao and follow all of her platforms and vice versa. Obviously Gloria does great work, which is why I reached out to her in the first place to see if she could be on this live stream, so that we could be bringing you these weekly news updates. And of course, we're always going to be focused on really trying to help you understand what is happening in the news on the continent. We got plenty of news stories coming next Thursday, so stay tuned. I'm going live again this coming Sunday, and this coming Monday again. So Sunday, Monday, next Thursday, we will be live, or I will be live at some point in time. So check all of the Authentic African to see when and where those will be.
Yeah, live popping. Sorry, those are my favorite lives. Anytime I see you, I'm stopping and I'm dropping. And shout out to Inem, the live.
Inem Richardson, yes.
Rich, good stuff. Love
yes,
it.
Absolutely. That's what we do with African Stream. You know, African Stream is in a reduced capacity these days because they're silencing the people who are bringing the truth. But at least we get to do that monthly. And so if you guys, okay, so that's a good point. So if you guys haven't already, go back and check out this earlier Tuesday. We went live and we talked about the suspects that were identified in the coup, or the attempted coup in Burkina Faso, and a number of other stories around what Burkina Faso has been doing since Ibrahim Traoré has taken over. And so, you know, lots of good content there. By the way, Inem Richardson is living in Burkina Faso. She also goes back and forth to Niger, and she just opened up two Thomas Sankara centers. She opened one in Burkina Faso previously, and she just opened one in Niger, and that was one of the announcements we talked about. So she also gives good book recommendations and all that on that live stream, so you can check that out as well. So that's This Month in Africa, and we will continue to do This Week in Africa, Gloria and I. So with that, thanks for watching. We will see you all on the next video. Bye, guys.